The white boss laughed at me every day, but she didn't know who my father was. They humiliated me in the office, gave me dirty work, and ignored my ideas. I kept quiet until one day. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Write in the comments. What country are you watching from? I remember the morning clearly, not because it was remarkable, but because it was so incredibly ordinary. The grey light creeping between the slats of my blinds, the faint hum of the city waking up, the muted rustle of my sheets as I forced myself out of bed. There was no triumph in that moment, no cinematic music swelling in the background, no chorus cheering me on. Just me, 20 years old, standing barefoot in a quiet apartment I had rented under a name that didn't carry the weight of legacy. That was the point. I walked across the cold floor and opened the closet. Inside hung a careful selection of clothes. Not tailored suits or cashmere sweaters. Nothing that would suggest privilege or even comfort. Just practical things. A simple beige blouse, grey slacks, and a dark jacket that looked slightly too big on me. I had deliberately chosen pieces that blended in, that didn't draw attention. That was how I wanted it. Not because I was ashamed of who I was, but because I needed to understand who I could be without the name. Eliza Walton, the daughter of Richard Walton, CEO and founder of Creighton Solutions. A name that turned heads, opened doors, commanded attention. But today, and for the days to come, I wasn't Eliza Walton. I was Eliza Ray, just another young woman starting her first corporate job. No family connections, no glowing recommendation, no expectation. I slipped into my clothes slowly, buttoning each button with deliberate care. I pulled my hair into a modest bun and avoided even a trace of makeup. I looked into the mirror. No sparkle, no shine, just skin, bones, breath. I could feel my own pulse as I tightened the laces on my shoes. This was who I would be. This was how I would enter the world I had watched from boardroom windows and chauffeured cars. On foot. The subway ride was long and crowded. I stood the whole time, wedged between a man reading yesterday's paper and a woman listening to something too loud through her headphones. No one made eye contact. I found solace in the anonymity of it. It was almost comforting how completely I could disappear in a crowd. I watched the tunnel walls blur past, my reflection flickering on the train windows like a ghost. When I emerged onto the street, the wind had picked up. Tall glass towers loomed over me like monuments to ambition. Creighton Solutions stood among them, 47 floors of steel, glass, and quiet power. I stopped across the street and looked up. I had visited that building hundreds of times as a child, though always through a private entrance, always with someone waiting. But today, I would enter through the front like everyone else. The security guard didn't look up when I handed over my ID. He scanned my badge, nodded toward the elevators, and returned to his screen. No recognition, no double take. Perfect. The lobby was as I remembered it, pristine, echoing, alive with quiet urgency. People moved in clusters or alone, their eyes on screens, fingers flying across digital tablets. No one noticed me. I was a shadow passing through bright white marble. A young man in a pressed navy suit gestured toward the HR desk when I hovered too long near the directory. His expression was professional, neutral, uninterested. I followed his direction, stepping up to the desk where a woman with a clipboard looked up at me briefly before confirming my name and department. She handed me a temporary badge and told me someone from my team would meet me shortly. Then she returned to her screen as if I had already vanished. I waited. I stood still in a corner near the water station and watched the people around me. Their conversations were quiet but urgent. Eyes darting towards elevators, phones vibrating constantly on glass surfaces. I felt the pulse of it all, efficient, impatient, untouchable. When my team lead arrived, she didn't smile. Her eyes scanned me with the indifference of someone checking inventory. She introduced herself, Joan, and told me we were already behind. Her tone implied I was part of the problem. I followed her down a long hallway into the heart of the office. It was open plan, rows of desks with short dividers, exposed ceilings, clean white lighting. There was no warmth. Every space felt designed for maximum productivity, minimal comfort. My desk was in the corner near the printer. There was no chair yet. Joan told me someone would bring one later and gestured toward a stack of paper that needed organizing. I started working. I didn't ask questions. I didn't try to make conversation. I filed. I copied. I sorted. Around me, people laughed, whispered, tapped furiously at keyboards. I felt their eyes pass over me, pausing just long enough to register difference, then moving on. At lunch, no one invited me. I ate alone in the break room, quietly chewing my sandwich while two other employees discussed weekend plans, as though I wasn't there. They didn't even lower their voices when their conversation shifted to diversity hires and how corporate was getting too soft. My ears burned, but I didn't flinch. I folded the wrapper of my sandwich with clinical precision and made a note in my mind. The rest of the day passed in a blur, tasks with no context, instructions tossed in my direction like scraps. Someone handed me a tray of coffee to distribute, even though I was supposed to be in analytics. I delivered the drinks without protest. I wiped up a spill no one acknowledged. I fixed a jammed copier and watched as the person behind me snatched the papers from my hand without so much as a thank you. When the office emptied out, I was still there, restocking the supply cabinet. My back ached, and my fingers were dry from cardboard and toner. I turned off the light and walked back to the subway in the dark. No one called, no one messaged. I had made no ripples. In the quiet of my apartment, I lay on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. A single thought echoed in my mind. Not bitter, not angry, just clear. I am nobody, not yet. The next morning came too soon. My body felt heavier than the day before. I moved slower, but I moved. I arrived early, hoping that might matter. It didn't. I was met with more tasks, more silence, more glances that looked through me, rather than at me. They never said my name. I was her, or worse, nothing at all. Fingers snapped to summon me. Notes were shoved into my hands. Joan passed by my desk twice, without acknowledging my presence. Only when she needed something printed did she look directly at me. And even then, it was with the same gaze one might offer a vending machine. Useful, replaceable, inanimate. The days stacked like bricks. I stopped trying to speak during meetings. My ideas floated, ignored. My emails went unanswered. I watched as my work was used, my suggestions subtly absorbed into other people's presentations. My name never appeared. Still, I wrote everything down. Every change I made, every problem I solved, every pattern I noticed. I became my own witness, not for validation but for truth. Because even when no one else saw me, I did. There was a moment that crystallized everything. A Thursday afternoon, Someone had left an open cup of coffee too close to the edge of their desk. As I passed by with a folder, someone else bumped me. Deliberate or not, I never knew. And the coffee spilled. It soaked the edge of the folder. There were murmurs, frowns. Someone muttered something about clumsiness. I stood still, holding the dripping folder in my hand. The room around me buzzed with irritation. I cleaned it up in silence. That night, I stood in front of the mirror again. My clothes smelled faintly of office air and spilled caffeine. I looked the same as I had that first day, but something inside had shifted. Not broken, not bruised, settled. I knew what I was doing now. I wasn't just surviving this space. I was reading it, mapping it. Every dismissal, every theft of credit, every narrowed eye was a page in the story I was gathering. Not for revenge, not even for justice, for understanding, because no matter how carefully they looked past me, no matter how skillfully they erased me from the narrative, I was still here, and I was watching. I was nobody, but that would not last forever. Time moved differently once I stopped expecting to be seen. The days no longer carried individual character, only weight. I awoke each morning with the same stiffness in my joints, the same subtle dread humming beneath my ribs. There was no variety in my reflection, no evolution in my tasks, only a continuous cycle: arrive early, perform without acknowledgement, leave last. It didn't matter that I held a degree in statistics, that I had studied systems optimization and predictive modeling. My title said junior analyst, but my reality was that of an invisible servant. I became adept at interpreting half gestures and unreadable emails, deciphering the tasks no one explained, but everyone expected completed. I replaced ink cartridges before they ran dry. I brought documents to life with charts no one taught me to build. I compiled figures for meetings I was not invited to attend. I was not part of the team. I was beneath it. The most constant part of my routine was the silence. It clung to me like a second skin. In that quiet, I began recording, not for them, for me. In a small black notebook that I kept tucked inside the lining of my bag, I documented every occurrence that struck me. Not just the moments of cruelty, though there were many, but also the systems behind them, the patterns. Every morning, Joan would breeze past my desk without a glance unless she needed something urgently. If she called out a name, it was never mine. When reports were praised in the group chat, my name was omitted. When a slide I had designed ended up in a director's hands, it was attached to someone else's signature. Still, I took notes. One entry detailed the way Joan structured her weekly briefings, prioritizing metrics that masked inefficiencies. Another chronicled how Madeline in HR dismissed grievances from younger employees of color with identical template responses. Another page held time-stamped moments when team leads made casually cruel jokes about interns or diversity hires. My pen became my witness. I was not collecting evidence for a confrontation. I was building a portrait of the company's culture from the bottom up. They never knew. I worked so quietly that they forgot I was capable of thought, that I was watching, that I understood. Sometimes, when I arrived before dawn, I sat at my desk and listened. The hum of the air conditioning, the distant clang of maintenance crews, the shallow echo of footsteps across marble. I imagined how many others before me had sat like this, capable, overqualified, unseen. What had they done? Had they quit, adapted, broken? I stayed, because beneath the detachment I cultivated, beneath the practiced silence, I was angry. Not the kind of anger that explodes, the kind that simmers slow and calculated, waiting. It wasn't vengeance I wanted. It was clarity. I needed to see how deep the rot ran. The week they announced the company's internal innovation summit, the office buzzed with new energy. It was the one time junior employees could submit proposals and possibly present them in front of senior leadership. I watched my coworkers hustle to throw together flashy slides with vague ideas, most focused on appearance over substance. I took my time. By now I knew the systems better than many of my superiors. I had identified redundancies in workflows, inefficiencies in client onboarding, delays in invoice processing. I knew how to fix them, and I did. My proposal included full simulations, visual data models, time comparisons, and cost savings. I submitted it quietly, electronically, under my placeholder name. I didn't mention it to anyone. 3 days passed. I continued my work. Then during a late lunch, I took alone in the far break room. I heard them talking. Joan and another team lead. Their voices drifted in through the open door, careless. She submitted a brilliant model, one said. It'll look fantastic at the summit. And she's letting you present it? She doesn't know, Joan replied, amused. It was on the shared drive. I polished it a little. It's fine. She should be grateful someone noticed. They didn't say my name, but I knew. That afternoon, I checked the summit lineup. Joan was presenting a proposal under a new initiative titled Streamlined Internal Architecture. The summary matched mine word for word. Only the visual design had changed. I sat still at my desk for a long time, staring at the screen. No rage came, only a quiet ache. It wasn't the first time my work had been taken. It wasn't even the worst. But this one stung differently. Not because I wanted the spotlight, because I had built something meaningful, and it had been reduced to a bullet point in someone else's pitch. I turned to my notebook and wrote a new heading, Day of Disappearance. I listed the sections of my original report, and next to each I wrote the page, numbers of Joan's slides that matched them. I included timestamps, notes, and reflections. Then I closed the notebook. The next day, Joan strutted past my desk with the casual triumph of someone who had never faced consequence. I didn't look up, but in that moment, I made a decision. If they were going to use me like a shadow, I would let them. I would disappear completely, but on my terms. Over the following week, I removed all identifiers from the new content I was producing. I submitted documents with generic titles, withheld login credentials from folders they might copy from, and locked certain spreadsheets unless requested directly. I wanted to see how much they truly understood the material they were repurposing. Predictably, they didn't notice. They continued reusing my drafts until they encountered broken macros, mismatched data, and dead links. They blamed interns, blamed each other, and through it all I kept smiling faintly, nodding when asked to fix things I had deliberately disconnected. I became indispensable without being visible, the perfect ghost in the machine. Then came the invitation, an automated message. Congratulations, your proposal has been selected for executive review at the Creighton Innovation Summit. My stomach turned. But when I opened the message fully, the name was not mine. It was Joan's. She had used my registration. I stood at my desk, the floor cold beneath my shoes. I looked around at the office, row upon row of bright screens and dull faces. No one looked back. No one noticed the quiet girl with her fists clenched at her sides. I left early that day. At home, I opened my personal laptop and retrieved the original file I had submitted. I compared it again, line by line, with Joan's. There was no doubt. I printed both. I laid them side by side on the floor, a mirror and a mockery. I didn't cry. I didn't call my father. This was what I had come to see. And now I had seen it. The next few days were a blur of numb precision. I completed every task assigned to me, arrived even earlier, left even later. I sat in meetings, filed reports, watered the dying plant near the copy machine, and I planned. I planned for the summit. I planned for the moment I would no longer be invisible. I planned for the unveiling, not of who I was, but of who they were when they thought no one was watching, because they hadn't seen me. But I had seen everything. The night before the summit was too quiet. My apartment, usually a cocoon of ambient noise from the city, car horns, distant sirens, footsteps echoing in the stairwell, had fallen still. It felt like the world held its breath alongside me. I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by open folders, printed slides, annotated spreadsheets, and that same black notebook that had become the mirror of my silence. The dim yellow light from the overhead bulb cast soft shadows across the pages. My hands moved slowly, deliberately, as I sorted my materials for the last time. There was no fear left in me, only clarity. I had spent weeks collecting their habits, their hierarchies, their hypocrisy, but tonight wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, about reclaiming my voice, not to scream, not to condemn, but to affirm, to step out from the perimeter and declare that I had always been here. I didn't need them to approve or applaud. I didn't even need them to believe me. I just needed them to see. I printed the final version of my presentation from my personal laptop, even though I had already uploaded it securely the day before. I made backups on USB, on the cloud, on paper. I wasn't taking chances. If they tried to erase me one last time, I would still be ready. I had already lived in their oblivion. It had taught me how to move without permission. When I closed the laptop, it was just past midnight. I sat in stillness for a moment, palms resting flat on my thighs, eyes unfocused. No anger remained, not even sadness, only purpose. I folded my documents, packed my bag, and set out my clothes for the morning. A tailored black suit, not ostentatious, but unmistakably precise. Clean lines, sharp shoulders, truth stitched into every seam. I didn't sleep much. I didn't need to. At dawn, I walked the familiar route toward the heart of the city. I didn't take the subway. I needed to feel the weight of the pavement beneath me. Needed to move through the streets without glass between me and the world. The wind tugged at my coat, but I didn't fasten it. The cold helped keep me steady. The summit was being held in the company's downtown conference center, an offshoot of the main headquarters, but no less grand. When I arrived, the front steps were already dotted with early arrivals, suits in grey, navy, and charcoal, lanyards, polished shoes, the language of power encoded into fabrics and posture. I climbed the steps, my badge invisible beneath my coat. No one stopped me. No one looked twice. The irony of my anonymity comforted me more than I expected. Inside, the lobby glittered. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling in geometric arrangements. A long reception table stood at the far wall, staffed by bright-eyed interns in matching uniforms. I walked past them silently. They didn't ask for my name. Beyond the lobby, the presentation rooms spread like veins from a central artery. I found my assigned room, a high-ceilinged space with rows of black chairs, white walls, and a massive screen behind the podium. It smelled of cold metal and new carpet. I stepped inside and set my things on the front table. The audience began to trickle in. Middle managers, department heads, senior analysts, directors. I recognized faces that had ignored me daily for months. I saw Joan too. She entered with her usual poise, flanked by two men in suits. She scanned the room quickly. When her eyes landed on me, something in her expression flickered, confusion, perhaps even recognition. But it passed. She didn't know. Not really. At 10 minutes past the hour, the lights dimmed slightly, and a voice announced the opening of the session. People settled. Conversations died. The moderator stood, introduced the event, the session title, and the presenters. Joan was named first. Her walk to the podium was brisk, calculated. She thanked the room, smiled at the executives in the front row, and began to speak. Her slides came up on the screen. Sleek, familiar, my models rearranged, my phrases repackaged, my logic diluted. I didn't flinch. I watched her present the work she believed she had taken. I listened to the confidence in her voice, the precision of her language, but I could hear it now for what it was. Performance, a hollow echo of something she didn't understand, a shadow of labor she hadn't done. The presentation ended. Polite applause followed. Joan stepped back, beaming faintly, and took her seat. Then the moderator cleared his throat. Our next speaker, he said, is a new voice to some of you, though her work has shaped much of what you've seen today. Please welcome Eliza Walton. The silence was immediate, profound. Heads turned, eyes widened. A few people gasped audibly. One man dropped the pen in his hand. Joan went still. I rose without hesitation. My steps to the podium were slow, deliberate. I stood straight, met no one's gaze directly, but felt every gaze on me. I adjusted the microphone with calm hands and looked out across the room. I've been in this company for several months, I began. Not as a leader, not as a daughter, not even as a voice, but as a presence, quiet, constant, and unseen. No one moved. I spoke without bitterness. My voice was steady, measured. I didn't recount my pain. I didn't accuse, I revealed. I laid out the structure of silence that lived in our company's bones, the hierarchy of visibility, the theft of credit that wore a smile, the subtle systems that lifted some while erasing others. I presented my full report, the original. I walked them through the model they had clapped for moments earlier, and I showed them the parts they had not noticed, the ethics they had missed. I told them how I had lived among them as nobody, and how that had taught me everything I needed to know. I ended simply, without flourish. I didn't come here to expose anyone. I came here to remind you that excellence doesn't ask permission to exist. It just does, whether you acknowledge it or not. Silence held the room for a long moment. Then someone clapped, then another, then more. But I didn't need the applause. I stepped down and walked past Joan. Her face was pale. Her eyes avoided mine. She didn't say a word. Back in the hallway, I exhaled fully for the first time that day. I felt no triumph, only relief, a heavy, cleansing kind. The truth had been spoken. That was enough. Later that evening, I returned to my apartment. I removed the suit slowly, folded it carefully, placed it on the chair. I lit a candle and sat in the glow. My hands were still, my heart was calm. They had seen me now, but more importantly, I had seen myself. The office had never been quiet before, not truly. There'd always been a rhythm to the noise, clicking keyboards, bursts of laughter too loud for the content of the joke. hurried footsteps and the murmured tones of ambition. But the Monday after the summit, that rhythm had vanished. I stepped off the elevator into a silence so complete it felt unnatural. Like the air itself was waiting for something to be said. No one greeted me. No one looked my way. I had expected that, perhaps even welcomed it. I no longer occupied the realm of invisible insignificance. I had become something else now, an interruption, a fracture in the surface of the reality they had so carefully constructed. They didn't know what to do with me. I walked to my desk, as I always had, though I sensed that its location would soon change. The corner by the printer had served its purpose. It had offered me the perfect vantage point to observe them without threat. But I had stepped out of the shadows now, and the corner no longer suited who I was becoming. The plant near the copy machine was gone. No one had thought to water it over the weekend. Its absence made the space feel smaller, or perhaps simply more exposed. I sat down anyway and powered on the computer. A few unread emails blinked in my inbox. Perfunctory acknowledgements, lukewarm congratulations from those who wanted to say something without saying too much. Most were from people I had never met. There was no message from Joan. I didn't expect one. A corporate-wide memo was sent out before noon, neutral in tone, wrapped in vague language about realigning departmental leadership. It stated that 2 senior employees had opted to pursue other opportunities. Their names were not mentioned. Their faces would not be seen again. The message was brief, almost sterile. I deleted it without reading it twice. Around me, people spoke in hushed voices. Some avoided my gaze. Others, perhaps emboldened by the shake-up, offered brief nods or polite smiles. No one said anything of consequence. No one asked questions they didn't want answered. I kept working. The HR department underwent a quiet restructuring. Madeline's name was scrubbed from the internal portal, her title removed from the team directory. Joan's email bounced back with a standard out-of-office reply. I imagined their departure had not been graceful, but I felt no pleasure in their absence, only a strange, hollow sense of balance restored. A week later, I received a formal letter offering me the position of Director of Internal Operations Reform. It was not a ceremonial title. It came with authority, staff, resources, and a mandate signed by the board. I had not requested it, but I accepted it. The irony of occupying an office on the 15th floor did not escape me. The same floor I had once visited as a child, clutching my father's hand, marveling at the scale of it all. The walls were still white, the chairs still ergonomic, the air still filtered to an artificial chill. But I wasn't the same. My nameplate was simple, just Eliza Walton, no title, no embellishment. My first act was to dismantle the silent caste system the office had operated on for years. I eliminated the unwritten rules that dictated who could speak and when. I banned after-hours assignments masked as tests of loyalty. I implemented anonymous reporting systems and made the results public, monthly. I held meetings where those who had never spoken before found space to be heard. I enforced accountability, not through public punishment, but through structural correction. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten. I simply made it harder to look away. In my new office, I placed a single item on the desk. The chipped white mug someone had once left on my chair as a joke. I had cleaned it thoroughly. It now held pens. Every time I looked at it, I remembered the hands that had passed it to me with disdain, and the hands that now signed policy drafts under my name. I did not need revenge. What I had built was more permanent. Occasionally, I wandered back to the lower floors, not in inspection, but in remembrance. I paused near the copier, where I had once stood for hours. I visited the lunchroom, where I had once eaten in silence. In those spaces, I did not feel haunted. I felt affirmed. One afternoon, as I reviewed applications for our new mentorship program, I noticed a name I didn't recognize. A young woman, just out of college, applying for a junior position in analytics. Her resume wasn't impressive on paper, but her personal statement was honest, searching. I invited her in for an informal meeting. She arrived early, clutching a thin folder. Her shoulders were drawn in, her gaze uncertain. She looked exactly the way I must have looked that first morning, all those weeks ago. No one had greeted her downstairs. The reception desk had been temporarily reassigned. She stood awkwardly in the hallway until I stepped out and welcomed her in. I didn't tell her who I was, not yet. We sat across from each other at my table. No desk between us, no titles, no performance. She looked around hesitantly, like she wasn't sure she belonged. I recognized that look. I had worn it for too long. I asked her questions, not about numbers or theories, but about how she learned, what she observed, what made her pause. She answered slowly at first, then with more ease. Before she left, I offered her a small card with my name on it, just in case she had questions later. She took it carefully, unsure what it meant. I smiled. That night, I stayed late. Not because I had to, but because I could. I stood at the window and watched the city flicker. Light moved across glass towers like breath. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was outside it all. I was part of it, but on my own terms. I lit the small candle on the table near my bookshelf, the same one I had burned after the summit. Its scent filled the room slowly, soft, steady, grounded. I sat in silence. No thoughts of vengeance, no unfinished business. Only this, a presence restored, and the knowledge that when they looked at me now, they finally saw not just a name, not just a daughter, not just a title, but a woman who had been nobody, and who had remade what that meant. Subscribe to stay updated. Share this if it matters. Watch the next story when you're ready.